now moving into the running back position, and this will be a bit shorter than the receivers because unfortunately there was not very many winners. Me and you had been texting throughout the weekend, just damn, this guy goes here. Another one bites the dust. Nobody going to the Cowboys, and then ultimately the Chargers not investing in the position till round 6. So very hard to call anyone a huge winner. Besides Jonathan Brooks, who we both agreed was in a tier of his own as a running back talent, I actually, the more I've thought about it, started to really like this landing spot. And I know there's some warts here, but you look at him landing with the Panthers and what Dave Canales, their new head coach, did with the Bucs. He fed Rachaad White 336 touches, second most in the league behind only CMC. And when he's right and healthy, Jonathan Brooks, I think, is 10 times a player. I'm not a huge Rachaad White guy. And so if he's willing to feed that guy 330 touches, I imagine once Brooks is good and ready to go, he's also going to be fed. He talked about Dave Canales when he was introduced before drafting Jonathan Brooks, how much he wants to stay committed, stay stubborn was his word choice with the run game. And then he goes and adds 2 premium mauling run blocking guards in free agency, the first 2 big signings they make. They've also added a bit of talent around now, Bryce Young. And again, I am a little bit cautious here, given how bad that was the most painful offense to watch in the entire league last year. Absolutely horrendous. There's no way around it. The Panthers were the worst show in town. But again, Adam Thielen's your wide receiver 1. Your line sucks. I don't know that I could give up on Bryce Young quite yet, even though it didn't pass the eyeball test at all, didn't elevate anybody really around him. I still think they've made all the moves you kind of have to make to at least give this guy in this offense a shot. And Jonathan Brooks, it all comes down to how is that knee? I know he tore it towards the end of last year, but once he's healthy, and all the reports are that he's going to be by training camp. No, it wasn't the Cowboys. It's what we all wanted. Didn't happen, but at least there's a path to a play caller that loves to use his guys on an offense that should take a big step forward this year. So Jonathan Brooks, to me, was one of the bigger winners at the running back position. My running back 26 now in best ball rankings, jumped up a couple spots. I would have been, again, running back probably 15 had he gone to the Cowboys, but ultimately not the worst landing spot in my opinion. Am I crazy, though, or are the Panthers just that bad that we can't even sniff him?
No, I don't think you're crazy at all. I mean, it wasn't Dave Canales, so it's a little bit comparing apples and oranges. But I mean, we saw once Miles Sanders Chuba Hubbard overtook Miles Sanders last year, we saw him getting 20 touches a game, and obviously a different coaching staff, so we had different expectations. But like you mentioned, I mean, they fed Canales was a part of an offense that fed Rachaad White last year, so you never really know. I just think it really comes down to the health. Like, it's not a question of is Jonathan Brooks going to overtake Chuba Hubbard or Miles Sanders, whoever's the pseudo RB1. It's a question of when. And if he can do that in the first quarter of the season, I think he's going to be a top 20 running back. But if it's halted off for a little bit, if it takes a little bit longer than we expect, whether just because the team's not comfortable or if he just physically isn't ready, like, to take on a full workload, it could be a number of things. But if that doesn't happen until like a little bit later in the season, maybe even into the second half, I don't think it'll take until the second half of the season for him to really come out of his shell and be the true running back 1 for the Panthers. But yeah, it's just really the health, and the training camp reports are really going to drive his ADP. Yeah. So if they're negative, it's going to cause a lot of people to come off of them, and I'll probably jump back in because I think no matter what really happens, unless he has another injury, the 2024 season ends with Jonathan Brooks as the top running back in Carolina. So, I mean, I will see where his ADP shakes out for BBM, but it's looking like he's going to be one of the cheaper guys who's like a shoo-in to be the starting running back on their team. Shoo-in might be too aggressive, but I just don't see a reality where they spend a second-round pick and a guy with the talent like Brooks doesn't overtake Chuba Hubbard. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think it's more of a formality, and this is Brooks' job to have whenever he's healthy and capable of handling an NFL-sized workload.
I mean, not only a second-round pick, they traded up to get him too.
Yeah.
That was some hefty capital they gave up. So clearly they had a vision in mind. I agree completely with you. Once he's ready to go, I think 15 to 20 touches at minimum will be the expectation. So I'm looking forward to that. It ends up being a winning spot. Now, in terms of other guys, nobody got quite a boost like Jonathan Brooks in landing spot. There are a handful of guys that I thought landed in decent locations, albeit with some lower draft capital. So maybe we're just going to be spinning our wheels talking about guys that don't really matter. And one of the biggest takeaways actually of this draft to me, we'll talk about on another show, but in terms of veteran running backs, maybe while we're drafting, we'll mention some of these guys. So guys like Zamir White, Zach Moss, Gus Edwards, guys we've actually been drafting a decent amount, so I was happy to see it, are ultimately going to be in line for probably 250 or so touches, which is madness because their teams did not invest or invested very little in the running back position. But all that being said, we're focused on rookies. We're focused on redraft here. And I think Ray Davis is probably the second biggest winner of the running back position, landing in a great offense with the Bills. And yes, James Cook will be the main back. I do think James Cook is in a great spot to see a ton of receiving volume, given that Keenan Coleman's the only offensive player they added as a pass-catching focus there in this draft. I like James Cook a lot, but I also could see Ray Davis playing that souped-up Latavius Murray role. I believe you looked it up. He had some pretty astounding goal line usage, if I'm not mistaken, right? Latavius Murray did?
Yeah, he was top 12 in the league as in terms of carries from inside the 5. So he had the goal line role pretty much on lock. And even when they flipped from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady, I know that was a time where we saw a change up in the usage for James Cook, and a lot of people point to that to being a positive in terms of James Cook outlook for 2024. But even when that offensive coordinator change came, Lat Murray still somehow hung on to that goal line role and was the primary guy that they were going to inside the 5. So if Ray Davis can come in, and I think it's pretty feasible for that to happen and take on that goal line role. His competition will be Josh Allen. Unfortunately, he's not just competing with James Cook for that role. But I mean, there's a lot of questions about this offense, but I still think it'll be quality. I think Josh Allen is a strong enough quarterback to carry along the weakened receiving core that's now highlighted by Keon Coleman. But if Ray Davis is able to come in here and take on a little bit more of the in-between the 20s work than Lat Murray, because Lat Murray last year was basically exclusively third and short and then picking up the goal line work. So if he's able to take on that Lat Murray plus role where he's getting work in between the 20s, I don't think we're going to see him use much as a pass catcher, but kind of that ground and pound throughout the length of the field and then get used at the goal line. I think he can be fantasy relevant. I don't think he's going to be a game changer, guy you need to have drafted in the last couple of rounds of drafts. I think James Cook is going to pretty handily control the touches in Buffalo, but he's definitely a guy that I was interested pre-draft. And the landing spot, I mean, I think my level of interest remains the same. It's not great, but it's definitely a positive. And then with these other guys, I think the only one that I'm super interested in is Tyrone Tracy. I mean, at this point, we're talking about guys, Tracy, 5th round draft capital, Vidal and Laube, however you want to pronounce it, 6th round draft capital. So you're kind of picking at straws with these guys. I mean, running backs who are drafted in this range, they rarely work out. I mean, people are going to point to Kyron Williams, but I think that's more, I think most people recognize that's more of an anomaly than an expectation. So Tracy, the wide receiver, converted wide receiver, he provides some interesting traits that I think the Giants could use. And I'm not completely sold, or I don't think anyone is sold on Devin Singletary being a high quality NFL running back. He does what the coaches need. We've talked about him just being an innings eater type of guy. He does everything well enough that he stays on the field and he's not a liability out there. So he can be on the field pretty regularly. But I think Tyrone Tracy can compete. I don't think it's that hard to steal work away from Devin Singletary. And then with Laube in Las Vegas, I was really hoping that the Raiders were going to take someone because I'm not the biggest Zamir White guy. I said throughout the draft process, if anyone lands in Las Vegas, they can be competing with White for touches. But unfortunately, the skill set for Laube, just it doesn't project to be highly used in an Antonio Pierce scheme. We see he fell in love with Josh Jacobs. He talked about he was their key to winning when he was healthy. And then they go to another mammoth of a man in and Zamir White later in the season when Jacobs wasn't healthy. And I'm sure you've seen those off-season workout videos from Zamir White.
Oh,
and
monster.
yeah, Laube is just like, he's not remotely even similar. Like, they're not even close to the same running backs, Laube versus White and Jacobs. So I don't think he's the type of running back that Antonio Pierce is looking for. So I'm not like super excited about it. I think he can siphon off some of the pass catching work because that is not exactly White's wheelhouse. So I think that's where he can make his mark. But the 6th round draft capital and just like what I think that Antonio Pierce values in running backs, it's tough to see a world where Zamir White isn't handling the vast majority of touches.
I'll put just a couple counters for you. We'll start with Dylan Laube. The one, actually, one of my our original fans wrote to me right after the draft, Mr. Gonzo. I don't know if you're watching, but shout out to you. He connected a couple dots, and you've seen the comparison, Dylan Laube and Danny Woodhead, and it's like, okay, a white pass-catching running back. But Tom Telesco was the Chargers GM when they went and made a point to go out and get Danny Woodhead from the Patriots, who had 90 catch seasons over there, and now he goes and drafts Dylan Laube, who, whether it's just because he's a small pass catching white running back or not, he is one of the best pass catching backs in this class. Some people calling him the best route runner there. He was the Senior Bowl stud. And yeah, sure, coming from UNH, didn't face the best of competition. I did actually get to see him face Holy Cross when I went out to a game, though, and he popped off the page, and he was running all over the field, catching the ball. I think he had 9 catches against us. The kid can absolutely play. And sure, I think Zamir White will dominate the carry total, but I could see Laube walking into 40 to 50 catches, given that comparison to Danny Woodhead, given the GM going out and getting a guy that he once had that type of role. Wouldn't stun me at all if we saw Laube ultimately catch 40 to 50 balls. And if something happened to Zamir White, or if Zamir White's just not getting it done, don't rule the kid out. I think he's a baller. That his small school stature drove him down a little bit, but man, he could, if he gets the opportunity, and I think he will. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he ends up being a player, and there's a path to it with the Raiders, one of the most open opportunities. And open opportunities are also abound there for Tyrone Tracy and the Giants. You highlighted a lot of it, but just the numbers here, 375 total opportunities vacated, most of those because of Saquon Barkley leaving, but that was 87.6% of the backfield total opportunities last year. So Tyrone Tracy, a very versatile player, once a receiver, as you highlighted. I could see him getting a very intriguing role. I'd still believe in Daboll, as we talked about with Neighbors. I could see Tracy carving out a nice receiving role there as well. So I like both of those guys. But I did want to also highlight Kimani Vidal going to the Chargers, who we labeled the second best spot behind only the Cowboys for running backs. Of course, the Cowboys did not take anybody. They did re-sign Zeke, and we'll talk about him because I see your question, Chrono, on that. But ultimately, Vidal landing with the Chargers. We know Greg Roman, top 3 in rush attempts in every single year, calling plays except one, 9 out of 10 years. Loves the run game, and it's a creative run scheme. He mixes the power concepts, lots of pulls, but then gets some zone in there. It's just a great if he gets a diverse runner, it is awesome. And right now they only have Gus Edwards, who's 29 and has never, I think he has 700 career carries at age 29. He's barely seen a workhorse load ever in his career. And then you got J.K. Dobbins, who we've never seen stay healthy, coming off an Achilles injury that typically ruins rushers. I could see Kimani Vidal got those Maurice Jones-Drew style comparisons. And I don't even know if you know who Maurice Jones-Drew was back in the day, because we were talking about Cadillac Williams, but it's harkening back to one of my earlier fantasy seasons when MJD was a waiver wire pickup and ultimately had 20 touchdowns, that short, squat body that can also catch the ball. Vidal was visiting the Chargers time and time again. There was lots of rumblings that they were in love with this kid pre-draft, and they make sure to go out and get him. Yes, round 6 draft capital. Don't love it, and I don't expect that to ultimately yield a humongous role, but also an injury-prone and maybe not fully healthy J.K. Dobbins, and then just Gus Edwards, who I think Gus Edwards is in a great spot to yield some humongous value where he's getting drafted right now. But even still, we can't sit here and act like he is this world beater. I could see Kimani Vidal carving out a pretty significant role. And if there is an injury to either of those guys ahead of him, especially if it's Gus Edwards, wouldn't be shocked at all. A 3-down skill set coming out of Troy there. Was my kind of favorite sleeper running back of this class, and he goes and lands in one of the juiciest opportunities you could possibly ask for. So he's a guy that has flown up my rookie ranks. I already had him pretty high because, like I said, he was my favorite rookie sleeper running back. But now, I mean, he's contending with some of these bigger names that yielded much worse landing spots, in my opinion. He's going to become one of those guys that I draft at the end. Kyron Williams was my guy last year. I think Kimani Vidal is going to be that last round running back that I snag in nearly every best ball draft. I'm a humongous fan of the player and the landing spot.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious the level of opportunity in LA. I mean, they didn't add a notable name, and it's just Dobbins, who has not been able to maintain a healthy season throughout his career, and Edwards, who he's just a guy. Like he's no difference maker. He can do what's asked of him, but he's never really asked to do that much. You don't really build your offense around him. So I agree, the opportunity is there, and I think I've learned my lesson taking on listening to you about these late round stabs, especially the rookies. So I may have to take Kimani Vidal a little more seriously, because the path is pretty clear. I mean, we know that they're going to want to run the ball a ton. Like that's what we're getting out of Harbaugh, and the talent is certainly lacking. And there's certainly a possibility where I don't think there's a reality where he turns into a Kyron Williams, who's a 6th round pick and ends up being a bell cow. I don't think that's going to be the case, but meaningful work is certainly within the range of outcomes, some handful of carries a game, some games cracking double digit carries, if someone goes down or something. The path is there. So yeah, I think it may be time for me to consider Kimani Vidal a little bit more closely.
What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.